vital issues. I now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Ryan, and recognize him for 10 minutes for his opening statement. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before discussing health care and reconciliation, I want to begin by thanking you for continuing this committee's tradition, for allowing a full and fair debate and giving the minority the opportunity to offer motions in committee to modify this reconciliation bill. You've always been a gentleman, and I want to simply say at the beginning of this process, thank you for continuing to be one.
Thank you, sir.
Today in this committee, we begin what might be the final chapter of this health care debacle. My friends in the majority claim that what we are doing here is simply paving the way to fix a mildly flawed Senate bill. They argue it is a simple, frequently used procedure to move legislation through the Senate. But that's not what's happening here, and we all know it. This is, in fact, an extraordinary and unprecedented abuse of the budget reconciliation process. Reconciliation has never been used, never, to push through a $1 trillion expansion of government and to seize control of 1/6 of the U.S. economy. No one has ever employed the process to leverage such a vast social change based upon a token $1 billion in savings, while we're facing a $1.5 trillion budget deficit this year alone, and doing it on a deliberate, purely party line vote. The only bipartisanship in this procedure is in the opposition to it. Never before has the House committee process been so grossly exploited. The thousands of pages of legislation reported by the committees of jurisdiction are irrelevant, even before we vote on them. We will report these provisions right here, as the process requires, and then they will all be stripped out, discarded, tossed on the ash heap, and then the real legislation will get written under the cover of the Rules Committee. In other words, we are right here creating a legislative Trojan horse in which a handful of people, hidden from public view, will reshape how all Americans receive and pay for their health care. And then it will be rushed to the floor, and members will be forced to vote on it to beat another artificial political deadline. We've also learned that the House might try to pass this 2,700-page Senate bill and send it to the President without actually voting on it. It appears that you are going to deem passage of the Senate bill in the rule. Last week, in a stunning and revealing statement, Speaker Pelosi said, and quote, "We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what's in it," end quote. This is the vaunted transparency that the President promised? The arrogance, the paternalism, the condescension to the American people is just breathtaking. This is not just a simple fixer bill either. This is the linchpin for health care. It's the vehicle for the backroom deal that will buy the votes so the House can pass the Senate health care bill, which then supposedly will be amended by this bill. To put it another way, if this process fails, the whole health care house of cards collapses. Of course, the real reason we are all sitting here in this room is because of one man, Scott Brown. We are here because Scott Brown won his election and got elected to the United States Senate, sent there by the people of Massachusetts. You can't pass this health care bill the right way, and so now you pass it the Washington way. We are not governing here today. We are greasing the skids for an abuse of the budget procedure intended to control the size of government, not expand it. But the stakes here go beyond the details of the legislative process and even the integrity of our constitutional duties. Let's consider the underlying health care legislation itself. Using the President's proposal, because it's built upon the same philosophy as the House and Senate health care bills. First, the most fundamental problem is that this legislation is not about health care. At the base essence of it, it's about ideology. It moves away from the American idea and toward a European-style welfare state that will lead millions of Americans into becoming more dependent upon the government rather than upon themselves. Even though it's not single-payer, and even though without the so-called public option, this is still a government takeover of health care. And here is why we keep saying that. The entire architecture is designed to give the federal government control over what kind of insurance is available for patients, how much health care is enough, and which treatments are worth paying for. This plan assumes that everything is connected to everything else. You can guarantee coverage for pre-existing conditions only if you have healthy people in the insurance pool to spread costs. And you can only do that by requiring everybody to buy health insurance. And you can do that only if you subsidize people. And once you start handing out subsidies, you have to impose artificial limits that further inflate the true costs and further strip decision-making power from patients and from doctors. It creates a health insurance rate authority, a Washington-controlled price-setting board. This will usurp state government's role in regulating insurance premiums, and it will further smother the normal market forces that would otherwise encourage innovation and cost-saving efficiencies. It empowers Washington to decide what kind of insurance will be available. The proposal gives the Secretary of Health and Human Services a new Health Benefits Advisory Committee, an unelected group of federal bureaucrats, unprecedented Washington-centered power to create and change the requirements for acceptable coverage. It gives the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force new powers to further limit patient choice, allowing the Secretary of HHS to unilaterally deny payment for prevention services contrary to task force recommendations. It empowers a comparative effectiveness board created by last year's stimulus bill that will restrict providers' decisions about what treatments are best for their patients. Let's take a quick look at the price tag. As I pointed out at the Blair House Summit a few weeks ago, the reality of this bill violates the President's promise that this legislation will, quote, not add a dime to our deficit, close quote. My friends will say the CBO has scored this overhaul and said it reduces the deficit. Here in this committee, we work with CBO every single day. They are great, hard-working people, very good professionals, and they do their work very, very well. But let's be very clear. CBO's job is to score what is placed in front of them. The authors of the bill have gamed the system themselves, writing the smoke and mirrors right into the bill. When you strip away the gimmicks, the double counting, and the faulty assumptions, it is clear that this overhaul does not reduce the deficit and it does not contain costs. This charade, both today's blind markup and the entire past year of debate, is dispiriting in so many ways. There are real problems that need to be fixed in health care, and we could have done so in a bipartisan way. That's the shame of all of this. We agree on the key problems and agree that real reform is needed. Skyrocketing health care costs are driving families, businesses, and government to the brink of bankruptcy and leaving millions of people without adequate coverage. We agree on the need to address pre-existing conditions, realign the incentives of insurance companies with patients and doctors, and root out waste, fraud, and abuse. We agree on the problems, and even rhetorically on many of the same goals. Yet the past 12 months have crystallized the differences in approaching to fixing what's broken in health care. It didn't have to be this way, and it doesn't have to stay this way. At the Blair House Summit, Vice President Biden claimed that we aren't qualified to speak on behalf of the American people. I respectfully disagreed then, and I respectfully disagree now. We are representatives of the American people. We communicate every day with those we serve, and it's clear that they are engaged. The people we represent, and I suspect most of us here, passionately believe we need to fix what's broken in health care. But I don't believe that this is the way to do it. The abuse of the legislative process, the abuse of the Constitution, a massive government takeover of health care in America. This process is not worthy of your support. This is not worthy of your vote. Let's start fresh, and let's work seriously to address this issue, and let's do it together. Mr. Chairman, before we move on to the motions, I'd like to ask for the requisite 48 hours to submit minority views.